Some families prefer the flexibility of savings accounts, and others prefer the conservative nature of a tuition guarantee and of a prepaid tuition program. At Notre Dame, we support both types of plans to support those who choose to plan and save for college. In addition, Saving for College also increases access. Research shows that starting savings accounts with children increases the prospects that they'll attend college. On the next slide, you can see that $1 makes a difference. Children in low to moderate income families with as little as $1 in a college savings account are 3 times more likely to enroll and attend a post-secondary education and 4 times more likely to graduate. Research has also shown that students who have a college savings account are better prepared academically due to early engagement and achievement in school. Research has also shown, as you can see on the next slide, that students with a college savings account are less likely to incur student loan debt. And the few students who do take out loans have $3,200 less in debt than those without a college savings account. So as you can see, college savings really makes an impact with all families. We at Notre Dame are not financial advisors or tax professionals. We're not trying to sell any sort of financial products. Notre Dame is a champion of college affordability, and Notre Dame is also a partner in the private college 529 plan. Notre Dame, in partnership with Minnesota and other 529 plans, are trying to inform constituents on the various college savings vehicles that are available and the benefits of planning and saving for higher education.
As you gather information about paying for college, you will likely encounter references to the 3-tiered model approach for paying for college. Those 3 tiers are saving before college, using current income and financial aid while your student is in college, and then afterwards using student loans. Eliminating one or more of those tiers can cause you to rely more heavily upon the other 2 branches. Some people choose to think of this as a 3-legged stool, where if all three legs are stable and well supported, you're going to have a pretty stable stool. However, if you take away one of those legs, you're going to be reliant upon balancing on just 2 legs or fewer. Typically what we may see is in those circumstances, families have to rely more heavily upon loans. And the next slide we'll talk about a little bit more about saving or borrowing. In this example, we have 2 students. The first one is Kelly and the second one is Pat. In the first scenario, Kelly's family starts putting away $100 per month from the time that she's born until she's 18. Assuming a 5% rate of return, she gathers $13,400 on that for a total of $35,000 in order to use that she saved to use for college. In the second example, Pat is borrowing $35,000 in student loans to help cover her share of college. As you can see, not only she's borrowing $35,000, but she's going to be paying extra interest on top. So in essence, in the first scenario, they're spending $21,600. In the second one, they're going to end up spending total $48,000 for the same $35,000. Next slide. Okay. We're frozen on the slides. Please bear with us for a moment. Here we go. So basically, just to sum up that previous slide, if you save for college, you're going to earn interest, whereas if you borrow for college, you will end up paying interest. So the takeaway message is it's cheaper to save than to borrow for college. How much should you save or prepay? This can vary depending on what your college goals are. One thing to do is to use a general calculator to estimate the total cost of a college education. One such calculator is found on the College Board's College Savings Calculator site. This will help you determine how much the college education will cost and help measure the effectiveness of your current saving strategy. If you're looking for something more school specific, if you're interested in a given university or want to check out several just to compare, each school is required to have what is called a net price calculator on their website. What the net price is it's something that it can be defined as you'll have the sticker price of what it costs to attend, and that includes tuition, fees, room, board, books, and things of that nature. Any financial aid you receive that would be subtracted from that gross price, and the remaining amount is net price. So when you use the net price calculators, you can not only get an estimate of what those costs will be, but you can also get an estimate if you could potentially qualify for any financial aid. That can help guide your savings to figure out if you'd be able to pay that out of pocket, or maybe you need to save a little bit more to make that a more realistic number. Things to understand with financial aid. There are typically two primary financial aid applications. Almost all schools who are accredited will use the FAFSA. It's the free application for federal student aid. This allows you to, or your child, to be considered for federal grants such as the Pell Grant, federal student loans, Parent Plus loans that are through the feds, and federal work study. A lot of institutions, particularly private institutions, often use what's also called the CSS financial aid profile, and that is something that is typically used toward institutional aid, like grants and scholarships. Financial aid can include things, free money, which are grants and scholarships that you don't have to repay. It may also include things like loans that have to be repaid, or things like work awards that your child will have to work in order to earn. One of the biggest things to consider when you're looking at financial aid, don't assume or try not to make comparisons with, say, your neighbor. A lot of times in financial aid we hear, well, I make the exact same amount as my neighbor and all of our finances are identical, but our financial aid is different. That could be for any number of reasons. Could depend on the cost of the school you're attending. It could depend on the financial aid that school offers. And realistically, there are often some pretty big differences when you delve down into finances. So what might look the same on the surface often isn't the same underneath. This is just a slide that demonstrates how the price of college has increased. You've probably seen a lot about this in recent news reports indicating how the cost of college has been skyrocketing. As you can see, the increase in public four-year colleges in the last 20 years has been about 83%, and for private four-year colleges, it's been about 60%. However, the second line under each that says net of aid, that shows how much financial aid has increased over that same time period. So for the public four-year colleges, although costs have gone up approximately 83%, aid has only increased about 58%. And the same for the four-year colleges, although their costs have increased about 60%, aid has only increased about 30%. So that's just something to factor in. Then financial aid policies do vary based on schools. Notre Dame is one of 69 schools that meets full demonstrated need as determined by the CSS profile. Other schools may offer combinations of merit and need-based aid. Financial aid packages often include loans and sometimes significant amounts, so that is something to watch. When you do start receiving financial aid notifications, sometimes it can look like there is a pretty hefty amount of financial aid offered, but if you read the fine print, some of that or a substantial portion of that may be loans. So it's just important to ask the financial aid office, is this a grant? Is this a scholarship? Is this a loan? Hopefully it's easily and clearly identified on that notification letter, but if not, really make sure what you're getting into, because what looks like it could be a great full ride may actually contain quite a bit of loan money that you're going to have to repay. Additionally, savings tend to have minimal impact on need-based grant eligibility. This is if the assets are held in a parent's name, and we'll go through that a little bit more in the next slide. Typically, when you're looking at saving for college, there are a couple ways to do it. You can save it under the parent's name, or you can save it under the child's name. Typically, it's better to save under the parent's name. The reason for this is child assets are assessed by the financial aid applications between 20 and 25%. So if your student has $10,000 in savings, when you complete the FAFSA or complete the profile, it's going to look for your student to use anywhere between $2,000 and $2,500 of those savings in order to pay for each year of school. Whereas if you put them under the parent assets, it's looking at a top rate of 5.64%. Parent assets also tend to have protections built in because they realize that if you have, say, $100,000 in investments, the applications don't assume that you have full $100,000 available to pay for school at that point. There are often protections built in, figuring in that you'll need emergency savings and that life happens. So it's not, again, anticipating that you're going to be have that full amount free to pay for school. Additionally, there are asset protections built in for parents. funds like 401ks and 403bs are not included. While they're an asset of yours, those are not weighted in terms of determining your ability to pay for college. Additionally, for the FAFSA, the family's primary residence is not included as an asset. It may be on the college profile. And the value of small businesses owned and controlled by immediate family members is also disregarded on the FAFSA. So basically, financial resources that are owned by a child can be also spent on whatever the child wants, whereas if they're owned by the parent has a little bit more say in how those funds are directed.
We'll go through some college savings options in this next section. Typically, when selecting an investment vehicle to use for college savings, a major consideration would be the tax provisions for each of the options. There are three categories of college savings options: taxable investments, such as UGMAs, UTMAs, life insurance, mutual funds. These are options that will not have any special tax treatment when used for higher education. So you'll be taxed on the growth, and you'll also be taxed when you withdraw the funds to pay for higher education. There are also options with special provisions for paying for higher education, and that would be savings bonds and some retirement accounts and some insurance policies. And there are also options that are created for education, and that would be things like such as the Coverdell and the 529 plans. The Coverdell and the 529 plans offer tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals. One of the major differences between a Coverdell or a 529 plan is that Coverdell accounts can be used for kindergarten through 12th grade expenses. So any families who have children going to private or parochial schools might consider using a Coverdell to help pay for those expenses. In addition, Coverdell accounts do have income limits. So to use a Coverdell account, you need to have less than $95,000 income if you're single, or $190,000 if you're married. On the next slide, we talk about the benefits of 529 plans, and as we mentioned, one of the major benefits is that the earnings and the distributions are federal and state tax-free if they're used for higher education. In addition, one of the other nice benefits of a 529 plan is that the account owner controls all the assets at all times. They can change the beneficiary at will, but there are also no income limits, and account control never transfers to the beneficiary. It always remains with that account owner. Most states, including Minnesota, have worked really hard to make low minimum monthly contributions, have low contributions be the minimum. And they've also worked really hard to give it high beneficiary amount, generous limits on the amounts that you can contribute to the accounts, so over $300,000 for each of the states. Also, for estate planning, contributions do qualify as completed gifts. You can contribute $14,000 if you're single, or $28,000 if you're married. And there's also a 5 times the annual gift tax exclusion that can be contributed in 1 year for a 529 plan. So that would raise those limits to $70,000 if you're single and $140,000 if you're married. One thing to note that these are investment accounts typically, so savings may be considered a misnomer. They potentially could lose principal in some of the investment options. There are state prepaid plans that are available, but in Minnesota they do not offer a prepaid plan. If you have family who's in Illinois or Michigan, those would be states that offer prepaid plans. And there's also a prepaid plan that works for private schools across the nation, and that's the Private College 529 plan, and Joe will talk to us about that in a little bit. One of the neat things about the 529 plans recently is that investment options can actually be changed twice a year. So that's new. It used to be that they could only be changed once a year, and that's recently changed. And one thing to keep your eye on when you're selecting investment options is fees. So in the next slide, we'll kind of talk about, how to select a 529 plan. One of the first things to look at is a home state's state tax deduction or any other favorable state tax considerations. Robert and Bob will talk to us a little bit about Minnesota's specific plans. The next thing to look at once you take a look at the state tax treatment is risk versus guarantee, and that kind of goes back to talking about investment options versus going with a prepaid program. Once you decide which option is best for you, decide whether or not you want to go direct sold or advisor sold. select between the different investment options, look at the different historic investment returns, evaluate the fees and the manager. On the next slide, you can see that there are 3 types of 529 plans, nearly 100 state-sponsored plans. That's because most states offer more than one plan. And then there's state prepaid tuition plans. As we mentioned, Minnesota does not offer one of these prepaid tuition plans. And then the private college 529 plan. So that's the one that's 278 schools have gotten together and they formed a consortium to guarantee tuition. And that's the prepaid tuition program. When evaluating whether or not to use a direct or an advisor-sold 529 plan, as you can see on the next slide, there are advantages and disadvantages. One of the major advantages to using a direct sold plan is lower fees. And so typically there are less fees for a direct sold plan. The disadvantage would be the time and effort to research the investment options and the tax rules. What you'll see is that each of the states have actually worked really hard to make sure that they have resources available for their residents and for non-residents as well to help them research the different investment options, and they all offer fantastic toll-free numbers. For those who are more comfortable using an advisor, there are advisor-sold plans that offer professional advice and allow financial advisors to help you create a comprehensive financial portfolio that allows you to integrate college planning with your other financial objectives. The service typically comes at higher annual costs. There's usually higher fees to consider with an advisor-sold plan. On the next slide, there are 2 major categories of investment options. One would be a static option, which is an investment portfolio that is not programmed to change over time. Those could be individual fund portfolios or multi-fund portfolios. The other option would be age-based options, and that's where the asset allocation of the portfolio is programmed to change over time. Typically with an age-based option, what would happen is that as a child is a newborn, and if they go into a 0-aged fund or a 0 to 3-age fund, it's going to be more heavily equities-based and less on fixed income assets. And as that child approaches college age, and as that child approaches the age of 18, it's going to automatically ratchet and become more conservative, so that it's more heavily weighted on the fixed income and less on the equities side. And Minnesota actually will be talking to us about all the options that they have available in their plan in just a few moments. One of the things we talk a lot about is taking a look at the fees and evaluating the impact of those fees. And on the next slide, you can see we have 2 examples. So one of them is the green line, which would be both of them assume a $2,000 annual contribution, but the green line actually assumes that there are no fees, and the blue line assumes that there's a modest 1.5% advisory fee. You can see that over the course of 20 years, the difference between the 2 lines is $10,000, which is equivalent to 5 years of contributions. So as you can see, the accumulated impact of fees really do add up, and so as you're selecting between the different investment options, keep your eye on the fees. And now we'll have Robert and Bob talk to us about the Minnesota 529 plans and their options.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. We're still just before noon here in Minnesota. First, I want to thank Mary for reaching out to us and allowing us to partner with Notre Dame on this, and appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to talk, if we can go on to the next slide, one more, please. I'd like to talk a little bit first about our office. I work for the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, which is a cabinet level executive branch agency of the Minnesota state government. And we have had a 529 plan available under the Minnesota College Savings Plan since about 2001. And during this entire time, TI-CREF, Tuition Financing Incorporated, has been our plan manager, and we've been through, I believe, 3 different RFP processes, and they have come out on top each time, and so we've appreciated their partnership and work. And before we talk specifically about the 529 plan, I'd like to talk about what our office does in general. It's the College Savings Plan is just one small piece of what the office does. So for those folks watching from Minnesota, We also oversee the Minnesota State Grant Program, which is the largest program. It's a need-based grant program, and to apply for that, it's the same as applying for the federal Pell Grant. You fill out the FAFSA, and that's it. There's not much else to do if you're a Minnesota resident and you're attending a Minnesota college or university. Also, we administer a child care grant for our students in Minnesota. We have a state work-study program, need-based, similar to the federal program. We also we administer the Minnesota GI Bill scholarship program and the Minnesota Indian Scholarship Program. And we also have our own state loan program, the Minnesota Self Loan, which is intended to act as a alternative private loan beyond once a family or student has looked at their federal loan options. So we do a lot of things here. We also have a research division that provides guidance to our governor and our legislators about higher ed issues, and they are quite active as far as publications and things. And if you'd like to learn more about any of these things, you can go to our website, which, or you can just search for Minnesota Office of Higher Education. But our website is OHE for Office of Higher Education, ohe.state.mn.us. So if you want to learn more about the planning for college, all sorts of things are on our website, and we encourage you to take a look at that. Also, we'll get back now to the 529 plan in particular, and that has its own website of mnsaves.org, mnsaves.org, to learn more or to enroll or just to poke around and see what things about the plan or look at the application, whatever you'd like to do. Mary had talked earlier about the state of our whether Minnesota has a state tax deduction or credit for making contributions to the Minnesota College Savings Plan. We did not have one and we were going into this legislative session. And for those of you from Minnesota, again, you know where our government stands right now. We have some bills signed by the governor, we have some vetoed, and we're looking at a special legislative session. Well, one of the compromises that came out of the session was there would not be a tax bill nor a transportation bill of any size this session. Unfortunately, we worked very hard, and we actually had in the omnibus tax bill that never got to the governor's desk. We actually did have a tax credit and a tax deduction in that bill, but we're hopeful that they will pick that up again next session. But for now, there are no tax advantages for contributing to the Minnesota plan. That being said, we still believe we have a very strong plan, and our philosophy of the plan from the beginning has been to be simple, straightforward, try to keep the fees down, and what we've done as far as how we've picked our various asset possibilities and asset allocations for account owners to look at, we've tried to keep the list relatively short. There are some 529 plans that have a very long list of possible investment options, and we have decided to go with a shorter list because we know that when faced with many, many choices, such as when you walk into the cereal aisle and you see 500 kinds of cereal on the shelf, sometimes you just get a paralysis over you and decide to walk away and not make a selection at all. And we would rather have people, we don't want to lose them. We want them to open an account and start saving for their children's education. So we've kept the options to a minimum. However, the entire risk horizon is there, and Bob will talk more about that. But you can invest from something that has zero risk up to being fully invested in equities and carries the maximum risk. So, but I'll let Bob talk more about that. One of the results of that philosophy, if you start looking and comparing returns on the investments over the years, is that you may find that some of the investment options did not reach the highest highs when the markets were up as they are now. But also during the recession, a few years ago, our accounts did not bottom out as much as some other plans investment options did. So we've tried to just kind of take a medium path, a middle of the road path, and we believe it works quite well. And we've recently lowered our fees on the 529 plan. So we are trying to do the best for the account owners and helping them out so that more of their money goes to paying for education expenses and less to fees to manage their accounts. So I think at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Bob Stern and let him talk about the plan specifics.
Thanks, Robert. First of all, I'd like to thank Mary as well for including us in this webinar. It's really a privilege to be here. I also like to thank Robert for everything that his office does. As Robert mentioned, I work for TIA-CREF. We are the only program manager that the plan has ever had, but I can honestly say it's a true privilege to be associated with Robert and the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I mean, they're really a phenomenal group. To kind of keep going here, Mary, if you wouldn't mind backing up just one slide, can we do that? Okay, great. So real quick on this slide, a couple of things I wanted to stress. One is the plan assets are, at the end of the year, they were 1.16 billion. We're actually getting close to 1.2 billion. So this is a substantial plan. We have over 61,000 accounts established, and of course, many people have more than one account. So the number of account owners is a little over 30,000. And the next point is pretty important. The average account size is a little over 19,000. And the reason I point that out is that people who are starting to do this, one of the things that paralyzes them, that forces them to sort of not do anything, is this idea that you have to save everything. And you know, if you use the calculator that Mary was talking about, you may just go into shock when you see how much money you're going to need to cover college for 4 years. So again, we try to stress the idea that every dollar that you save is one less dollar that you're going to have to borrow. And you can see our average account owners do save around 19,000. So that's more what you want to think about as opposed to trying to save it all. And then lastly here, one of the lowest 529 college savings plans regarding fees. And again, this has a lot to do with Robert's office. In the last contract renewal, they insisted on getting our low fees even lower, and we were able to do that. So we're right up there now among direct sold plans as one of the very, very most affordable. So we're moving on here. I think we can, and this, again, this summarizes all the wonderful things that Robert's organization does. If you go on our website, the mnsaves.org that Robert mentioned, there is a link as well to the Office of Higher Ed site. So go there and then you can see the things that they do. Moving on to the next slide here. So real quickly about TIA-CREF, we are a very experienced plan manager. We have been serving higher education for over 90 years. And we offer a variety of financial services, everything from insurance to 403B, to we have our own bank. And the 529 division that I work for is called TFI, or Tuition Financing, Inc. We currently manage 10 529 programs. One in California is our largest. We also handle Wisconsin, which is a neighboring plan to ours. And as Robert mentioned, we have been the Minnesota plan manager from the beginning since 2001, and we're very proud of that. So moving on to the next slide, we can. As Mary mentioned before, probably the thing that, especially for novice folks, the thing that is the most daunting is choosing a combination of investment options. And it's important to point out a couple of things. One is that any new contribution can be allocated to any option. So you have a lot of flexibility. And then I think we alluded to this before, you can transfer between options up to twice a year for the same beneficiary. And again, you can choose any combination you want. The one thing I like to stress is that these plans are not designed for people to day trade in the stock market. You know, if that's what you're looking to do, that's not what this is about. One of our senior people in our company likes to describe the 529 plan as being able to protect you from yourself. So it's not about trying to time the market to get in, to get out, but to actually put your money in and have it work for you over the long haul. So having said that, if we move to the next slide, You can see this is our most popular option. This is the managed allocation option, or as it was referred to previously, an age-based option. And the way this works, without getting too complicated, is when you open the account, you simply specify your beneficiary's age. So let's hypothetically say your beneficiary is 2 years old. Looking at the pie chart on the left, you would see that 80%, the green, is invested in equities or stocks when the child is young, because you have a long period of time to ride out any market fluctuations. And a smaller percentage, of course, is in fixed income, which gives you that sort of guarantee no matter what happens of paying the interest. And as you can see, as the beneficiary gets older, the green portion of the pie shrinks. And so what's happening is the amount of exposure to the stock market is being gradually reduced. And the great thing about this option is you don't have to do it yourself. Our professional fund managers take care of this. That's what they do all day long, and they worry about that. So moving to the next slide. Again, you can see as the beneficiary gets older, looking at age 11, the stock exposure is about 50%. And then if you look at the very last pie chart, you can see when they get to age 15, now we're down to just 30% stocks. And if we move to the next slide, you will see the trend continues. The amount of principal protected, meaning funds where the actual principal is protected regardless of what happens to the market, keeps increasing. The fixed income where you're earning a set rate of return, that keeps increasing. And again, the green portion, the stock market exposure, which offers the greatest potential for return, but you're also taking the greatest risk, that shrinks over time as well. And again, this option represents over 90% of what our account owners choose. This is what they really like. So moving on, we do offer other options as well. This actually is very unique to Minnesota, this principal plus interest option. We used to call it the guaranteed option. But basically the way it works, it's kind of the way a money market or a CD used to work, if you think before interest rates fell through the floor. And the way this works is that we create an effective guaranteed rate for each year. And so you can see, if you look at the fine print here, through August 31st of this year, any funds in this option earn 1.2%. And this is backed by our insurance operation and our subject ability to pay, which has been unchallenged here for 90-something years. So this option is ideal really for people that do not want to take any risk, that want to protect perhaps a large amount of principal. And an interesting side note, during the financial crisis, which was alluded to earlier, this was a very popular option in our plan because many other states do not offer this. And at the time, in 2008, 2009, this option was still paying 4% and even higher. So we had a lot of money coming into Minnesota to take advantage of this. So again, this is another option that's available. Moving to the next slide, we are now going to start presenting some of what are called our static options. I'm going to roll through these very quickly because, again, if you want more information, best move would be to go onto our website or contact us and we can tell you here how this works. In short, this is a very aggressive option. You can see, again, look at the green part of the funds. Over 80% are in stocks, and these would be what we call generally high beta stocks. So the Teslas of the world and Netflix, stocks that tend to move up and down. And this would be, again, for somebody who has a high level of risk appetite. Moving to the next one, you can see same idea. There's a fair amount of stock market exposure, but again, the risk levels are different. The moderate would be somebody who wants some stock market exposure, but they want it hedged by fixed income. So there's about 40% in fixed income. And then the conservative option would be for people that want some stock market exposure, but they want also to not take an enormous amount of risk. So again, here, if you look at this pie, it's kind of similar to in the age-based option as the child gets older. But again, this is a static option. These percentages don't change. And this would be for somebody who really likes these percentages over the long run. So moving on, a couple of other choices we have. Go to the next slide. Frozen. Anyway, there we go. So both of these are very specific investment investment strategies. The first one, U.S. large cap. So that is, as it sounds, you're talking about big companies, Microsoft, Apple, very large, Johnson & Johnson, General Mills, those kind of companies. 100% of the money is invested in those companies. Now that would have been a phenomenal strategy here the last 2-3 years. On the other hand, during the financial crisis, this is not where you'd want to be. So that again is one option. The next one, U.S. and international equity. That, again, all stock market exposure. We have U.S. funds mixed in with a fair number of international funds as well. I'm sorry, stocks as well. And again, the risk level on both of these would be considered aggressive. Move to the next one. We also have an international option. The difference between this option and the last one is this is strictly international. So you may have people that, or you may be interested in having all of your investments in the international arena. That's what this option does. And then, of course, this last one would be equity and interest, where you've got half in the stock market and the other half would be principal protected, like that guaranteed option that we talked about. So kind of a 50-50 split there. And finally, moving on, the next one. Oh, there we are. Thank you very much. So these are our last two choices. So this 100% fixed income option would be, again, for somebody who wants very, very little risk or a moderate level of risk. And this is all fixed income, so all bonds and other types of fixed income instruments that pay a fixed rate of return. And lastly, this option is not used at all by, well, I shouldn't say that. It's used by a very small number of people. It's kind of left over from when interest rates were a bit higher. It's the money market option, which is paying just money market rates. And as I'm sure you all know, those are very, very low now, down around 0.01%. So putting your money in this option would effectively give you a return. Rounded off, it would be right around 0%. So those are all the static options. Moving to the next slide here. To kind of sum this up, I think the key thing to remember about our plan is that it is very low cost. As Robert mentioned, it's designed that way. There are no sales commissions, no account maintenance fees. The only fee that we have is the annual asset-based management fee. And the simplest way to think of it is for every $1,000 that you put into the plan, you will pay between $1.97 and $3.37 so that's between 0.19 and 0.33%, again, depending on the investment choice that you make. Again, very low since there are no commissions involved. You're not looking at as some of these advisor plans would be, as we saw before, as much as 4, 5, even 6%. So that's a huge advantage of our plan. But again, we don't have a base of people or a group of people selling the plan. So we use tools like this to educate people and get them to understand how it works. On to the next slide. Great, as I mentioned, again, no application fees, no transfer fees, no commissions, no sales fees, no other fees of any kind are involved. And finally, almost at the end here, it is really, truly easy to get started. We like to stress that you can start with as little as $25. And the important thing is to get the account open. You do not need to, try to save like you would for a down payment on a house or anything like that. Just open the account. You can open it with a check, with an EFT, electronic funds transfer. You can set up automatic contribution, meaning that you would have a certain amount taken out of your checking account every month, every 2 weeks, whatever. Payroll deduction is an option. We also have a very wonderful gifting and e-gifting feature, which you can learn about on our website. Again, as was mentioned earlier, we have a very high limit, up to $350,000. Frankly, that's not an issue for most of our account owners, but if you are in that position, it's kind of nice to know. There's no annual maximum per year. And then again, as we talked about before, there are gifting options available, so grandparents and other people who want to put money into the program can do that. Let me just conclude by saying that we are here to help. We are here to answer questions. In addition to going onto our website, we do have a field consultant who's actually out meeting with some folks in Marshall at a hospital today, at Aurora Hospital, so he couldn't be here, but his name is Chris McLeod, and he is available if you would like to talk in person, on the phone. I'll mention his number real quick. It's 952-830-3127. But again, you can go on our website and there's a scheduling tool, and you could schedule an appointment with Chris if you'd like to learn more about the plan. And again, we appreciate you taking time to do this. Back to this final point about the $25. You can open with as little as that. We do find that it's the first 25 that's the hardest for people to actually get going with. So that's the one thought I would leave you with, is if you can get the account open and get it started, then you can figure out the intricacies after that. So thank you very much for having us.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I would like to thank everybody for being part of the program today. My role is to give you additional detail about one of the 529 programs, which we call the Private College 529. The slide that's showing right now basically summarizes a lot of what has been discussed so far, particularly by Mary, the various federally blessed options that are available to help pay for college, to help plan and save for college. One of these is the Private College 529. Notre Dame and St. Mary's College here in South Bend are proud participants in the Private College 529 program, along with over 270 colleges nationwide. Maybe it'd be helpful if we just step back a bit and do a little history review of 529. 529 is a reference to a section of a tax law, Section 529, that was authorized by the U.S. Congress in the 1990s. The whole idea was, in addition to the other opportunities that were out there for planning and saving for college that had various limitations, this program would be aggressively expanded, encouraging every state in the country to open up a 529 savings and planning program, at least one, for residents of their states. So each state would have a 529 platform, and as we've seen with Minnesota, with a number of options available for investing and the resources for college. The private colleges across the country, hundreds of them, viewing the legislation at the time, were somewhat concerned that the opportunity to save was limited, often by the public school costs of the particular 529 program. So to encourage a higher level of saving that what might be needed for helping to afford private colleges, the private colleges lobbied and had an amendment made to the 529 legislation, which allowed groups of colleges to form a consortium, effectively becoming a 529 platform. Obviously, it wouldn't be a state, it would be a consortium of colleges. And currently, again, there's over 270 colleges, private colleges across the country who are involved. They offer exactly the same federal incentives in terms of no taxation on annual appreciation, no taxation on the distribution. Neither of those are taxable events for any 529 program, including this program. The Tuition Plan Consortium, as it's called, created what is now known as the Private College 529 Plan. The PC, as it's called, the PC 529 plan, is available across the country, a whole range of institutions varying in location, size, cost, curriculum, financial aid policies and procedures, resources, history, affiliations, a whole range across the country of institutions. None of these institutions will guarantee admission if the Private College 529 program is established. However, there's going to be plenty of opportunity. The next slide will basically summarize the main features of the Private College 529 program. They include all the federal benefits available to any 529 program. In addition, this program is special because it's guaranteed by the participating institutions. It's a prepaid tuition program. It's restricted to undergraduate tuition and fees, but it is a prepaid tuition program, not a college savings 529 program. Another special feature with this program, which is not available in most of the other 529 programs, is that there are no fees that the owner of the Private College 529 program will be paying. The next slide attempts to provide a summary of how this works. Again, it's you're making a pre-purchase of tuition. So you're not making an investment with risk. This is going to be a guarantee of an amount of money when the day comes for college. So the individual owner is purchasing a portion of tuition, up to 100% of tuition and fees at the time of the purchase of any given school around the country. It doesn't have to be applied to a particular school, but it could be any amount that the family wishes to contribute. And we'll explain this further in a minute. So at the time of the establishment of the PC 529 plan, there is no school that has been selected. Again, an important point here is that this program is 100% guaranteed, and it's the individual colleges who take the risk. So if someone wants to know what the return is on the investment in the private college 529, the owner needs to know that the return is 100%. It's a guarantee that whatever you put in is going to be made available later when the time comes to pay for college. It doesn't matter what the return is in the background. It's the owner who's concerned about exactly what the benefit of this investment is going to be. The next slide tries to illustrate what I'm trying to say a little further by providing an example. A family is looking around at the schools that are involved in the program and notices one school that they might be interested in, whose current tuition is $35,000. The beneficiary is currently 8 years old, and in 10 years dreams to attend this particular institution. Over the 10-year period, the college is going to be raising its cost. We're making this again as an illustration at 5% a year. 10 years later, when the young person is now 18 and ready for college, has been admitted by the school's tuition has risen over that 10-year period to over $57,000. However, when the initial purchase was made, it was for $35,000, which at that time, 10 years ago, would have paid 1 year's tuition and fees for an individual student. It doesn't have to be the full amount of tuition and fees. It could be any subset of that amount. However, you can see that when that student shows up with a certificate indicating that 10 years ago, a full tuition and fee was purchased for 1 year, presents that certificate to the institution, that institution's costs are now over $57,000. However, the certificate will cover the full tuition and fees of that institution for 1 year, having saved over $22,000 as a result of this prepaid tuition. So it is guaranteed by the institution, again, regardless of what may have happened to the actual investment. If they purchased a percentage, they will have that same percentage when the day comes. Another example might be if a person put down $10,000 on behalf of a beneficiary. At that particular time, the $10,000, let's say at St. Mary's College, may have been valued at 1/3 of St. Mary's tuition at the time. The same $10,000 that same year might have been at Notre Dame, valued at 1/4 of Notre Dame's tuition and fees. When that individual student shows up, they would have 1/3 of whatever has happened to St. Mary's tuition 10 years later, and they would have 1/4 of whatever may have happened to Notre Dame's tuition over that period of time. Again, this is another example of what the concept of a prepaid tuition plan is all about. The next slide reviews what happens if the student doesn't attend a school or doesn't need the 529 program. These provisions in front of us right now would actually apply to any 529 program. So if the student, for whatever reason, doesn't use the program, the owner of the program can move the resource to another child in the family, to another family member, including nieces or nephews, spouse, or even himself or herself. Any 529 program can be rolled into another 529 program. So if the student does not choose to attend one of the participating institutions in the private college 529 program, those resources in the PC 529 plan can be moved to another state platform's 529 program. If the student, for whatever reason, chooses not to go to college, has no plans on going to college in the future, or attends an institution where there is no tuition, such as a military academy, the family would like a refund of the investment. That refund can be obtained with some limiting provisions. And every 529 program is going to have its own provisions for what the procedures are regarding this refund. But the private college 529 program will guarantee a return within plus or minus 2% of the original investment. Let me just conclude my remarks by stepping back again and addressing one point that is often referenced. Jessica referred to this earlier. What happens for families who have a very solid behavior of planning and saving for their child's college education? The assumption is that having resources will limit or reduce or eliminate the possibility of getting financial aid. This assumption is very much a false one in many cases, and it certainly is exaggerated in many cases. The impact of having saved for college for individuals is very, very minimal, as has been explained. There are various ways of planning and saving for a college education, and the 529 plans in general are terrific opportunities that are federally blessed with tax incentives for families to do this. The opportunities that are going to be available as a result of the planning and saving are going to be there, and not having planned and saved isn't necessarily going to result in an automatic amount of money being available. Simply because you can demonstrate that you need money because you haven't planned and saved isn't going to translate into money. Eligibility for aid does not result in entitlement for aid. As has been indicated earlier, there are very, very few schools who are in a position, as Jessica indicated, to provide the full need of students who attend. There are thousands of schools, and less than 100 have resources available to meet the full need of students. So chances are very high that you're going to be left with facing additional borrowing as a result. In some cases, significant borrowing. And in some cases, even with borrowing, there may not be a choice because there are not enough resources available. The best position to be in is to have planned and saved as much as you possibly can. Not necessarily the whole amount. That's the role of student aid. But do the best job you can. You're going to have less stress when the day comes, less need for financing, less costs, and there's going to be choice. The young person will have a choice because you have planned and saved. What better way to help support the dreams of young people? Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. As you can, we're going to go back to one of the slides that Jessica had previously talked about, which is how much should you save and prepay. And we really can't emphasize enough using the net price calculators to get an estimate as to what each school's financial aid policies are going to look like. So when you're estimating the 4-year cost, that is a really important resource to use. Families come and ask and they say, okay, you know, I have a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 3-year-old. Should I still be using that next net price calculator when I'm creating my college savings strategy? And our answer is always yes, because it gives you a sense as to what the published cost is and what the after tuition, after financial aid cost would be for your particular family, taking into account that school's financial aid policies. You know, and as we talked about understanding financial aid, that it's not always grants and scholarships depending upon the school that you go to and their specific policies. It might include loans and work, and then determining that savings goal. And to piggyback off of what Bob had mentioned, really every dollar counts. So every dollar that you save is a dollar that you won't have to borrow, or that won't cause a budget constraint when it's time for you to send your children to school. So determining what that savings goal looks like for you and putting those resources aside, and obviously selecting a savings vehicle. The next slide kind of talks again about that expected family contribution calculator and the net price calculator. but also looking at your employer and seeing if your employer offers tuition benefits, or as Robert mentioned, what state benefits are available. So what state granting programs are out there for you to take into consideration into your own college financing strategy. And also other resources. We have here family members, because family members are a fantastic resource to talk to them about creating when you're talking about your college savings strategy. And grandparents are excellent people to get involved. Gifting is a huge opportunity to increase assets into those college savings accounts. On the next page, you can see that how hard states have worked to create a very streamlined way of opening a direct plan. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes. I think most states are actually less than that. So many states have streamlined it down to 5 to 10 minutes to open an account. Name the account owner, so it does need to be a U.S. citizen with a valid address. Provide your social security number or tax ID number, and then provide who your successor owner is. One of the things to note with 529 plans is that you can only have one account owner owning that account. So if you have a spouse, that spouse can be listed as a successor owner, but it can only have one account owner and one beneficiary for each account. You'll want to name your beneficiary, and you're going to provide that social security number as well. One thing to note with 529 plans is they're very flexible. You as an account owner can be a beneficiary. So if you're planning on paying for your own graduate school education, whether it be law, MBA, or any other graduate aspirations you might have, you can name yourself as that beneficiary and save for your own education. Choose the investment option. I think Bob and Robert both mentioned that most families do choose to use the age-based option. It's the set it and forget it, and it's an easy one to use. And then contribute cash or a rollover account. And then on the next page, you can see some different strategies to think about when funding your account. Small regular payments to create a savings budget is a fantastic way to go. Keep it regular, whether it's through direct deposit or automatic payments. Use those online calculators. Contributing extra income, that's looking at your income tax refunds and holiday birthday gifts, salary increases or bonuses. All of those are additional opportunities to add into your college savings plan and to really increase assets. Anyone who has a stay-at-home spouse, if that stay-at-home spouse decides to return to the workforce, that's another opportunity to include college savings in your household budget. Some families might choose to take out a second income or take out part-time job. We also like to see high school students or high middle school students participating and contributing their extra income to college savings accounts. So anyone who has children who babysit, do lawn care, pet sitting, get them involved and have conversations with them as to how you're going to finance their college aspirations and how they can contribute and they can save into their own accounts as well. Additional opportunities as one monthly expense ends, whether it be a car payment, your own student loans, daycare, those are all opportunities to add to your college savings accounts. We have some additional resources that you can view. So if you go to the next side, kind of talks about our savingforcollege.nd.edu website. This site has all the information that we presented today, except for the Minnesota information. The Minnesota information will be found on the partner state 529 plans. You'll see that there'll be a page for Minnesota, and we'll have the slides available there, as well as the webinar archive, the recording for today. Most of the information that we presented here at the panel is already out there in video and PowerPoint form in all the other different sections, whether you go through college savings options, or we also have additional resources under things such as example scenarios. On the next page, you can actually see that there's some additional resources that you can use. We're big fans of collegesavings.org, which is a consortium of 529 plans. They've gathered all the information on the different 529 plans and put it out there. And then the College Board website, bigfuture.collegeboard.org. And as Bob and Robert mentioned, mnsaves.org and the Office of Higher Education in Minnesota have fantastic resources for Minnesota residents and those who are looking to use the Minnesota 529 plan for their college savings needs. And then the Private College 529 plan has 2 different resources that can also be used. to research that as an option as well. At this time, we're going to take some time to answer questions. If you have any, please feel free to use the chat function. And we'll be here for the next few minutes to answer any questions that you might have.
Looks like there's 2 questions.
The very first one that's come out is I'm going to read it directly. Is I misunderstood the provisions of the 529, thinking that those assets counted in the assessment of financial aid that my grandchildren would qualify for. Time has passed and they now are 14 and 12 years old. I have mutual funds in my name that are earmarked for their education, but obviously these funds aren't protected from taxes. Would it be worthwhile to establish 529 plans for the remaining few years? So we're going to break this question up into 2 different parts. And the first one we're going to ask Jessica from financial aid's perspective. 529 plans, how are they viewed as a parent asset, and then how would that be different if it was a grandparent asset?
It's a somewhat simple and yet complex answer when grandparents have established the 529 plans. Typically, if a grandparent is the owner of the account and controls the account, the 529 plan, it does not show up on the financial aid applications as an asset for the student or the parent. However, once the schools start seeing disbursements from that plan, some financial aid offices may choose to see that as an untaxed income or as a resource for the student. Others don't. So it really, that part can vary a little bit school by school for how they handle that for institutional gift. But as a general rule, right now, if grandparents have 529s established for their grandchildren, it does not show up as an asset as long as the grandparent is the owner of the account.
Wonderful. And that loophole that you mentioned, a way to get around it would be to just have the dispersions for the final year of school, correct?
Possibly.
Okay. And then the other piece, which is, it looks like we have grandchildren who are 14 and 12 years old. I'm going to ask the Minnesota folks, would there be any benefits to having this grandparent establish 529 plans, even though these children are already, it looks like, in middle school?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get that at a lot of the events that we go to. People come up and say, my kids are in middle school, they're older, doesn't make any sense. The way I like to answer that is to say, it's never too early, but it's also really never too late to establish a plan. Again, back to this idea that every dollar that you're able to save is one less that you have to borrow. The reason I like that is that the borrowing is the part that can be very insidious. You hear all these horror stories of people that have, their life's been ruined by student loan debt and things. And in a lot of cases, what it means is that, as Joe was alluding to, people can box themselves in where their only real option is to borrow money from credit card companies. That's the easiest loan you could ever get from a Discover card is a student loan. So that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid putting yourself in a position where the only money you can get is money that has really high interest rates. It's going to take you a long time to pay back, and it really boxes you in. So I don't think it's ever too late to start. And again, you just need to be realistic about what you can save. And obviously, this person already has some money put aside, so that helps as well.
Wonderful. So the mantra that it's never too late and it's never too early to save is true.
It's true. We've actually, we've had people start when their kids are in high school. And you made a great point about how to do this. One example I can think of is we had somebody, they just eliminated their cable bill. They just got rid of it, and they put that money into this plan that they started when their child was in 10th grade. And at the end, they had amassed several $1,000s, which helped. It was a loan they did not need to take. So it really is never too late.
Fantastic. One of the other questions that we see that we got is, what advice do you have for parents who are undocumented and maybe ineligible for 529 plans given the U.S. citizenship required? I'm going to answer that at a high level, and I'm going to offer it to anyone else who wants to chime in. But I think, really when we talk about planning and saving for college, we're talking about planning and saving whatever the vehicle is. So if a 529 plan is not pertinent to you given your specific situation, whether you're from abroad, really the idea is to have college going aspirations and start putting money aside. There are a lot of inclusive savings products that are out there, whether it be prepaid programs. So there are the prepaid cards that you can use. I think American Express has one that can be earmarked, and there are different credit unions that are able to take out, are able to help you with creating college savings accounts that you can use for your children's education. Does anyone else have any thing that they want to add in terms of like resources that undocumented families can use?
Well, I would say that in Minnesota, Minnesota passed the Minnesota DREAM Act, I believe 2 or 3 years ago. And so even undocumented students, if they meet several of the qualifications in the state law, actually are now eligible for some Minnesota state grant aid and also resident tuition at the public institutions in Minnesota. So there's actually couple of separate pages on the Office of Higher Education's website for people in Minnesota if they are in that situation.
And then just a side note about financial aid for undocumented students, that does vary school by school. Currently, undocumented students are not eligible for any aid at the federal level, such as Pell Grants, supplemental educational opportunity grants, federal student loans, or federal work study, but certain institutions may offer institutional grants or scholarship to assist these students with paying for college.
So the best resource is really to contact some of the schools that you're interested in looking at and seeing if there are available resources and funds to help you navigate that process.
Exactly.
Wonderful. One of the questions that we've received is there any penalty for rolling over 529 plans between the private college 529 plans and the state 529 plans? So we'll ask Joe on the private college 529 plans, is there any penalty for receiving a rollover or having a rollover go to another plan?
I can't speak for all 529 programs, and hopefully our Minnesota colleagues can help respond to this, but there are no costs involved with rolling over in general from one 529 to another.
That's correct. We have no fees involved. There's no rollover fee or anything like that if you'd like to roll in or even if you roll out. That's correct.
I think the key is, and Bob can correct me, but just with like a pension rollover, I think the key is to make sure the money is transferred within a certain period of time. If you personally take possession of the funds and have the intention to then later on put them into another 529 plan, there is a strict time limit where if you miss that, the government considers that a taxable event. So my advice to people who want to roll over is to make sure that just do a direct transfer from one plan to the other. Don't ever take possession of the funds, and I think that will assure you of avoiding fees and taxes.
One of the other questions we got is there such a thing as overfunding a 529 plan? What happens with any extra funds at the end of college?
Well, we established the $350,000 limit that we have currently with something in mind that you mentioned earlier, is that we know that college and university prices have been rising, but also that many people are now not stopping at the undergraduate degree level. They're moving on to either a graduate or some sort of professional degree, law school, medical school, whatever. And so that's why we've raised that limit up. For any funds that are left over, and again, I'll lean on Bob here in case I get this wrong, but you as the account owner always have control of those funds, so you can reclassify or change the beneficiary and move it to another qualified family member. As was mentioned, maybe if you yourself are intending to go back for some education, you could bring it back and change the beneficiary to yourself. And if you do end up cashing it out, it would be a non-qualified withdrawal, and you would still get the money out, but you run the risk then of having to pay both federal, and in the case of Minnesota state income tax, plus normally a 10% additional federal tax penalty on top of that. But you do have access to the money. It never forfeits back. I think a lot of people worry about it forfeiting back to the government or to some other entity, and that is simply not the case.
Right, and I would add to that, because we get this question a lot. You can switch the beneficiary to any blood relative, so there's a lot of flexibility there. And again, there's no time limit. You know, if the child turns or the beneficiary turns a certain age, you're not forced to make a decision. So the name of the game here is to give you as many options as possible.
And you remain account owner the entire time, and you control those assets the entire time, right?
Correct.
Joe, do you have anything you want to add from the private college 529 plan? If there are still funds left over in the private college 529 plan at the end of college, how those assets can be used?
They can be used in exactly the same fashion as has been indicated by our Minnesota colleagues. And in many cases, that would include rolling into another 529 program. But if there are excess funds, they can certainly be used by siblings or other qualified family members.
And the private college 529 plan can only be used for tuition and fees.
Yes, but currently the provisions require that the distributions be used only for undergraduate tuition and mandatory fees.
So families who choose to use that can also use the Minnesota 529 plan for room and board and other expenses.
Exactly right. Certainly there can be more than one 529 account for an individual beneficiary. And in this example, as Mary suggests, one program can be used for tuition and fees. The other one could help with room and board.
So they all work together and to create a comprehensive college savings strategy.
Exactly.
Wonderful. For Bob and Robert, we got another question. What is the difference between using the Minnesota-sponsored plan and one from another state, since there's no state tax credit or deduction at this time?
Yeah, that's another really good question. As Robert alluded to, we have been working diligently on creating some type of a tax incentive, tax credit. It's still in the works. Some of you may realize we did at one point have a matching grant, which was income-based. It was eliminated during another fractious budget time in 2011. At this point, there's no state-specific tax reason to use Minnesota. But again, as we discussed, we feel that the combination of the low, very, very low fees and the flexibility of the investment options really creates a very compelling menu. Robert alluded to this, but I think it's worth repeating. A lot of the plans that are out there, the choices are dizzying, all of the different combinations, and that really can lead to paralysis, or what we call the procrastination factor. And as we mentioned, this age-based option is overwhelmingly chosen by most people, and I believe that's true of most 529 plans as well. But having said all of that, I always believe that any type of college saving is good, and check around. If there are things in other state plans that you like, no reason not to pursue that as well.
And I would also add to that again, part of the simplicity philosophy for Minnesota is also that we don't want our plan necessarily aimed at only people with high incomes. We also want the low and middle income people to just open that account and start saving something. And so if it's a person who doesn't normally interact with a financial advisor or whatever, and they just want to open up an account and get started, we hope that our plan offers them that opportunity, and we have the backstop of the toll-free lines and the people on the ground here with TFI that can answer those questions and walk them through the process if they're feeling a little unsure about the whole process. So that's why we do stress that we want people to look at the Minnesota plan. But I agree with Bob. In the end, whatever works best for you and your family, it's your money, but just start saving for college somewhere. Just
to add real quick to that, because this is really, I think, hits at the crux of this. we've done an hour and 15 minutes, and obviously there's a lot of complexity to this issue, and it's something that even the experts are all constantly learning. But when you come right down to it, it should not be that complicated. And the most important thing I think we've all stressed is just get going, just get started. Your knowledge will increase as you do it, and saving is one of those things that you need to create the habit. And if you don't, that's where the problem is. So, and none of this is set in concrete. I think we'd all agree. If you get it going and your circumstances change, that can happen. Your life circumstances change, whatever. Maybe what was working 5 years ago doesn't. Well, you haven't committed to something that that forces you. You can change. So again, that's what I would stress.
We'll take a minute and see if anyone else has any questions. Please feel free to use the chat box or send us an email and we'll check it. As we mentioned, everyone around the table is willing to answer any questions today, tomorrow, next week, next month. Really take the information, share it with your family, with your friends, and create a college savings strategy. The team in Minnesota is very willing to answer questions on different investment options and the different opportunities that they have through the state and through their savings programs. If you have questions on financial aid, our financial aid team is very willing to answer questions. We have an email, which is savingforcollege.nd.edu. If you email us any questions, we'll make sure that it gets to the appropriate team and we'll make sure that they get answered. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay.